Welcome back. You're now watching the lifestyle segment on the Weekend Show. I told you it was smelling really nice in the studio, and that's because they're right beside me, and I can't wait to try that. But talking about Nigeria, on the political segment, we spoke about the economic hardship and the government policies and how people are dealing with it. I personally believe in solutions. I believe in people being innovative and providing solutions to their problems because, yes, we can't always rely on government. We can hope government gives us better policies, but we have a role to play in this. And joining me to have this conversation, I have someone who has been able to try her hands at different things, try and fail, try and succeed. She runs a multiple award-winning law firm, Hamu Legal. She's also just been appointed to the board of Startup Niger. Her name is Saadatu Hamu Aliyu, managing partner, Hamu Legal. Good morning, Saadatu.
Good morning, Andy.
As you very well know, I'm very proud of you and what you do and what you've been able to achieve over the years, especially being a lawyer's son. When we think about lawyers, we think of someone who must have worked in some firm for 20 years before they think about doing their own stuff.
Yeah.
This is something that you've been able to break that myth. And also as a young person and as a woman, how has that journey been and what even made you decide to go that way?
Wow, thank you, Andy. You know, I've said we've given you the law degree.
Yes, I agree.
by extension. So really, I believe when it comes to law practice, it's such a knowledge-based profession. But of course, that knowledge isn't just gained within the four walls of the classroom. You'll have to gain some of it by experience. It's the reason why there is so much emphasis on a learning curve in the legal profession for you to sort of work up your ranks to learn a few things before you, perhaps if you choose to go out on your own. So for me personally, I had done traditional law firm work for over 5 years before starting Hamu Legal. And for me, the why is, how do we create a law firm that will be a platform and provide an experience not only for the clients, but also for the lawyers that are within the system? And we started at a time where Nigeria was at the precipice of innovation within the tech ecosystem. And we realized clients were seeking a different type of service. And based on my own understanding of at least the tech ecosystem, at least being a millennial lawyer at the time, I felt we were in a position to provide clients services that would resonate with what they need, but also be able to help them to sort of grow their businesses, nurture their innovation, amongst other things. So really, that was really the basis for the startup of Hamu Legal, because it's not that within a traditional system you can still achieve this, but the reality is for you to be able to change the narrative or change the status quo of certain things, you have to be clear what is the objective for us. So for us, at the core focus is how do we provide experiences on both ends for both the clients as well as for the lawyers within our system, and also how do we become solution-centric legal service providers, because majority of the time, a lot of the companies that we see today, by the time they came up and started doing what they are doing, there weren't even regulations or laws to guide them. So you had to be a lawyer that was also thinking within the law, but identifying where are the gray areas and gray lines that we can work within to be able to make sure that this innovation isn't killed by saying, you know what, the law says you cannot do it. And sometimes the law doesn't even exist to restrict it, yeah.
Interestingly, some people see the legal space as very traditional, but with my honorary law degree, in law and moving with the times, there are now different angles that I don't see the traditional law firms looking at. And so most people think of civil and criminal law, but you now have intellectual property law, which is now a big issue globally. You now have technology law. And what do young lawyers need to do to have that crossover into such spaces where they're also not limiting themselves?
So, you know, a law is really a society-based profession. You look at the society as it is now. What are the needs and what are the problems that need to be solved? with a huge level of innovation, especially within the tech space, with AI amongst other things, intellectual property becomes even much more significant. But the reality is the baseline for all of that is still understanding the concepts that exist within a traditional law setting, and how do I apply it into the concepts or innovations of today. So for young lawyers, I would encourage you, look at your own ecosystem. How can I add value or solve problems within that ecosystem? And if we're talking about law practice of today, you have to look at not just only IP, you have to look at also cyber issues. Because if we are moving to the tech space, it's no longer anybody coming into your house to do criminal law. They will be on the internet. And also look at yourself as a service provider, not only within the confines of Nigeria. So how do you create synergies and practice and more robust understandings of happenings around the world? Because if you look at, let's say, the GDPR, even before we had our NDPR and now the Data Protection Act, Nigeria was already, Nigerian companies and Nigerians were already subject to that GDPR. Either we've used service in the EU, or we've traveled by one way or the other, or we've provided services to those citizens of those countries. So have a global perspective, because the world is now very, very global, and companies are not restricted to just being where they are, because the reality is a number of companies are not even physically present in Nigeria and providing extreme services to us, like Netflix, Facebook, amongst others.
Interesting that you say that. I'm currently teaching a GDPR class, and I taught one last night, and
Okay.
so it's an area which I love talking about. But what's interesting is innovation and the startup space. Between 2019 and 2023, the startup space in Africa got about $15 billion in funding. Nigeria is in the top 4 with South Africa, Kenya, and Egypt, and we got about $4.4 billion. Whereas when I see innovation and startup in Nigeria, I see a lot of focus on financial and payment systems. And I was just wondering recently, say you want to move to a house right now, most houses they're asking for 2 years rent. Agency and legal fee, which used to be 10%, is now 20%. How come nobody is innovating around how you can get people to pay monthly salaries, and so you may take off the house? Or we use batteries every day. We have solar, we have inverters. Why do you think we're limiting our startup ideas and direction to the financial and payment sector in Nigeria?
Very good question. So, interestingly, startups come up to solve problems that exist in society. When we look 10 years ago, our biggest problem was either I need to make payments to one person or the other. So we're always on our way to banks. Even at the time the banks were able to start doing the digital banking, it wasn't moving as fast enough, as innovative enough. So that led a lot of innovators and people within that ecosystem to sort of begin to provide solutions that can solve those challenges. But again, rules help you sort of work within certain grid lines. So the financial sector, even though highly regulated, there were certain rules that a number of people would follow. So it gave investors confidence to put money within those companies, because they know there are certain guidelines and grid lines that those companies have to follow. And with that, it's easier for you to scale up. It's easier for people to even trust you, knowing, okay, you know what, if I put my money in either a Piggyvest or a Bamboo or some other app, there is certainty that these guys are regulated by a certain entity. And even you as an investor, you're able to say, you know what, I'm going to back this company because the regulator has put a stamp on approval on them. And when you look at from a private sector perspective, the banking industry has been the most advanced and most sophisticated in the country. So it was why we see more push towards the financial sector that led a number of people to focus on payments, card issuance. But the space is still very open. There is a lot more problems to solve. We've not been able to resolve, for instance, efficient cross-border payments that I don't have to go through an extensive hassle. But specifically to your question, why aren't we seeing innovation in other spaces? There are. It's just that they're not as mainstream as the financial sector, because it's not as organized as the financial sector. So specifically on the property aspect, PropTech is an area that is beginning to gain traction due to the huge infrastructure development that is happening in the country, either from the government side as well as from the private side. I've seen a couple of startups that focus on rent payment. I think there's one called Split that allows you to pay rent either month by month. There are also those who are doing electronic health management records that allows you to go to any hospital if they're using that same ecosystem to be able to access your health history one way or the other. And you can see within that space, the Ministry of Health is also trying to do a lot of work in terms of the digital health that will determine how do we do data sharing between hospitals, how do we even license and qualify those service providers to be able to house our data, amongst other things. So we're beginning to see a lot of more inclusion of day-to-day work that are involved. In fact, just yesterday on Instagram, I saw a company saying, I can't remember what it was called, that if I needed a driver, I can book a driver on. So you see, it's a problem everyone is having. Oh, I may not need a driver for a whole month, but I need a driver for the weekend because I'm going for a wedding, amongst other things. So for me, areas I would see that the next wave of innovation in Nigeria would come. I would see a lot of things happening in the edutech space because people are trying to advance their skills a lot, and we have quite a number of companies providing services within that space. I see a lot of innovation happening within the digital health space, and not just within the records management space, but even digital health devices, telemedicine, amongst other things. And on the PropTech side, we've seen a number of companies that give you access to buy cement, pay in bits if you're doing a construction project, or even you're doing a big project, you can reach out to them because they have the access to the vendors. And we had a couple of companies, so logistics, if you needed to hire a truck, you reach out to them and they sort of make the process easier for you. Logistics has also been amazing. GIG has done a lot in terms of, but that space is still,
small.
It's still, the space is big, but a few people are playing within the space, and it's because it's not as organized as the fintech space. So really my bets are on edutech, health tech, prop tech. I'm looking to see what would happen within that space.
What about agrotech?
Agrotech too. I mean, it's already happening, but because of the way we are structured within that space, it's been a very informal-based economy for the longest of time. So by the time we put a bit of structure into it that would allow innovation to scale it up, things will become a lot easier. I haven't seen a lot of, I've seen, I can't remember, they're here in Abuja, Thrive Agric, but they too, they're still connected to finance and investment, not necessarily in terms of how do we use technology in terms of the production, to do the soil testing, amongst other things. So looking forward to that space as well. But the reality is technology is an enhancer. It will only enhance what already exists. And the government has a responsibility to provide a framework and a platform for innovation to thrive.
I agree with you. Let's talk about people now. In cybersecurity, it stresses me when clients expect you to just do magic and they see boom, and I'm like, sometimes it takes months. And sometimes in cybersecurity, the biggest problem is human error. About a good 65–7% is someone who was careless, knowingly or unknowingly. In the startup space, we now have financial and fiscal responsibility. You have, and I've read recently of some startup where the founders paid themselves about $1.2 million in salaries and wages. You now see a lot of people, investors now, and you've noticed there's been a bit of a decline in the last 2 years because they give the startups the money and you're not seeing the products, whereas they are now having lavish lifestyles. How do you think founders can be held accountable? What structure should be put in place to ensure that one person's rubbish isn't spoiling it for every other person?
I mean, as a lawyer, I was always encourage innovators and startups, like whatever it is you're doing from jump, seek legal advice to
Yeah.
ensure even amongst all of you as the founders, your relationship is clearly defined, and then you're also following the necessary rules and regulation. And then another critical aspect that a number of startups ignore is governance. So you don't have a board that sort of approves certain things and or acts as a guidance for you to do a number of things that you need to do. Many startups don't focus on the governance aspect of issues until maybe they're about to raise a Series A, and by the time they've started, they've already collected money from 50 or 100 people without properly structuring it. So by the time you even go to raise capital, your equity structure is already all over the place. So for me, I would always say from day one, seek legal guidance. It may seem expensive, but the price you would pay at a later time would be higher, and even maybe will be the end of whatever it is you're starting. And governance is also an issue that is missing for a number of startups. I think is an area a number of companies need to look into, and we should be also responsible and ethical in terms of how we conduct business. It's one thing to have a board because the board is not involved in the day-to-day running of the business. So if you have clear governance structures, it's easier for you to do certain things. And how you run the day-to-day will determine how the people even within the system buy into the vision, contribute to it, and advance it. So really, ethical business, having a clear governance structure, and then don't sleep on legal.
Don't sleep on legal. Now, I've tried my best, and I'm so proud of myself not to focus on government in this conversation. But my last question, because you know I must, ease of doing business.
Yes.
I must give credit to the former vice president, President Yemi Osinbajo, who did a lot of work around ease of doing business. One of the problems startups and founders experience is ease of doing business. You know how long it takes to find your container in the ports, how long it takes to clear it, and all of that. And so I recall when Nigerians had approval to export yams before they got to their destination, they were all bad and all whatnot. What role do you think government can play to improve the ease of doing business work, which they had started in the last administration, but that doesn't seem to be the focus right now? What role do you think government has to play in that part?
I think government needs to, there should be a lot of synergy between the national and subnational level in terms of ease of doing business. And we've done quite a lot of legal and regulatory reforms in the last 8 years, particularly when it comes to ease of doing business. But a number of those things haven't been administratively figured out. So even though it has started, there are pockets of success, but there's still a lot of more work to be done. So for ease of doing business, especially for early stage companies or startups, I think beyond just giving grants and other things, I think it should be providing startups with clear incentives. Or if you start a business and I'm able to hire 10 or 15 more people, I get a certain tax break. Or as a startup, if I'm operating within certain principle, I'm adding renewable energy or I'm doing one or two things, there are additional incentives, that come to me. It's a good thing we've digitized the process of registering a company, but that's just the beginning of the process. How do I pay my taxes? Multiple taxation is such a huge, huge burden for a number of people. I know a number of people have complained, I'm being charged TV license tax in Abuja, I'm being charged radio license tax in Abuja. So quite a number of these things, how do we create a structure and a framework that provides business the avenue to thrive? A good thing the Startup Act has been passed, but we've not been able to see quite a lot of progress within that space. And again, it's also because it's one thing to pass the law, but what are we doing in practice towards implementation? So government needs to do beyond just formative presentations. We need to be more deliberate and action forward in terms of easing doing business.
I agree with you totally. You said that to Hamu earlier, is the managing partner of Hamu Legal. Always so proud of you. One of the biggest and best lessons I've taken in life was actually from you, where
Really?
you told me that whatever you do in this life, Andy, sometimes just be present. You don't need to
Wow.
do anything, just be present. And I've taken that with me, and that's what guides me. Like, you just need to be present regardless of what it is. And I've seen you carry that out in your professional career, and also seeing what you've done with startups, what you're doing with startups. And when I saw you being appointed to the board of Niger Startups, I was like, it's about time. So proud of you. Thanks for
Thank you.
having you on the show. Always a pleasure, and we are here rooting for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you
That's the
so
much we can
much.
take on the lifestyle segment. We'll take a quick break. When we return, more on the weekend show.